when I interviewed Savannah Miles for the first time, which was probably, I'm going to say, 3 or 4 years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago now. She was still in high school. I think at the time she was Miss Georgia Teen USA. It's so long ago, Savannah, if you're watching, I apologize, I can't even remember. But what I was struck by and what I remember to this day is how well I felt she interviewed, especially for a young girl, a high school girl. I believe she was 17 years old at that stage. And compared to some of the other, let's say, teenage contestants that I'd interviewed, and at that stage, I had primarily interviewed Australian contestants. I think Savannah might have been the first or second contestant outside of Australia that I'd interviewed. And to give you an idea, when I first started off doing pageant interviews, I actually said, I made it quite clear I didn't want to interview teenage contestants, not because I have something against teenagers. I worked with them for a great deal of my life. But because of what I do and the fact that it's live, it could be a little bit overwhelming for a teenage contestant who, let's say, is not used to speaking live on camera, maybe is not very comfortable doing interviews in general, and, if things go pear-shaped on a live, there's a certain amount I can do to help you, but not a lot. And you certainly don't want to just pull the interview because it'd be very obvious it didn't go well. But when I was interviewing Savannah for this first time, I mentioned to her that I thought she interviewed really well, and I asked her for tips, because it's one thing to interview well, let's say when you're 28, right, which is the upper age limit for a lot of the big four pageants, somewhere around there, 25 to 28. But when you're 17, to interview well takes a different sort of skill set, or let's say you've matured more quickly or learned the skill to interview more quickly. So I asked her, and I remember her saying this. She said, the skill of controlling the interview. Now, I doubly remember her saying that because when I interviewed her, I think it was late last year after she won the Teen Universe USA title. And now she was, I think, 20. She was in college. She'd lived a lot more life. And I asked her about her interviewing again, whether she had any interview tips. And she said exactly the same thing, controlling the interview. And it got me curious because we didn't really have time in the interview to delve into exactly what she meant by it. I mean, you can sort of make some assumptions about what it means. So controlling the interview. So, for example, not letting the interviewer dictate where the interview is going to go, and to some extent taking control of it. And this would doubly apply in an actual pageant interview where you have time constraints. Sometimes the judges, unfortunately, will ask you a question that doesn't really allow you to talk about the things you want. And you don't want to leave your pageant interview, you could have been working for this pageant for your entire life, and go, oh, well, I wasn't able to say what I wanted to say because the judges just didn't ask the right questions, right? But I bring this up because I've had that in the back of my mind for quite a long time. So what exactly does it mean to control an interview, and how can you do it without basically saying, well, you asked that question, but I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to say what I want, because obviously you can't be that tactless in pageantry. And then I interviewed Marisa Butler last week? No, early this week. Geez, Monday morning. Forgive me. It's Thursday afternoon. I'm all over the place, and I had a hit of tennis, and I really, really went at it. So my brain's a little bit addled at the moment. But I interviewed Marisa. And when I was on the Miss Earth Australia judging panel, Brittany Dixon asked me, and she was at that time Miss Earth Australia. She was Miss Earth Australia 2020, and she was sort of hosting the event. And she asked me, because I've done over 200 interviews, she asked me what was quite a difficult question to answer, which was, what was my most memorable interview? And in my position, there really are a lot to choose from. And I chose Marisa for multiple reasons that I won't go into. You can go back to the Miss Earth Australia video and watch me explain it there. But I mentioned Marisa as probably the most memorable interview that I'd done. And then when I interviewed her just last time, so earlier this week, she was an amazing interview again. It was a little bit different this time because obviously we'd known each other for a little while by now. She'd also appeared on one of our podcast episodes right after she'd won her Miss Earth USA title. So there was a bit more familiarity. So you could see in the interview, she was, I wouldn't say more at ease, but we sort of had a few more jokes around each other. There was some sort of good-natured ribbing, especially, when talking about her and her fascination with listening to lightning storms, and me laughing when she said that she could talk to her dog, and her dog understood. She said, "Stop, don't laugh at me." So, but what clicked in my head at that point was, I think I understand what this controlling the interview means. Because if you watch my first interview with Marisa and you just see how long it is, it's about an hour, 23 minutes, almost an hour and a half. Now, even by my standards, that's a long interview. Normally my interviews will be around the hour mark at least, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I'm trying to keep them under an hour these days. But with Marisa's interview, it was an hour 23. So I was kind of like wondering, why did it go so long? Did we talk about a lot of different things? Yes. Did I talk too much? I try to talk as little as possible during interviews. And what I noticed from going back through the previous interview and then watching some of the other interviews Marisa had done with other interviewers before we did our most recent interview, and then again in our most recent interview, what the skill that Marisa has, and in terms of controlling the interview, is no matter what question the interviewer or I ask, it's very clear. If you watch, and I strongly encourage you go to what, it doesn't have to be the interview I did with Marisa, because I'm biased. I like to think my interview was the best. But watch any interview, and I think this says something, any interview that Marisa does, and when she's asked a question, she uses it as a chance to tell a story or to point something out. And she does it in a very tactful way. It's not obvious at all, which is why I didn't clue on to it in the first interview. And I don't know if this is a skill that she's practiced, but in terms of what Savannah said, in terms of controlling the interview, Marisa does it probably better than anyone else that I've interviewed. And maybe that's why I picked her as the most memorable interview. But if you watch, for example, I asked her very early on, I think it was one of the first questions I asked her, was about her YouTube video, her YouTube channel, which I'd found. She certainly doesn't publish a lot, but some of the clips on it were soccer playing clips from 10 years, 11 years ago. And as it transpired, those were the clips that she used to get a scholarship into, I believe it was Stonehill College. So those are clips that, if it's anything like tennis, that talent scouts look at and go, oh, okay, we'll offer this one a scholarship, we won't offer that one a scholarship. And there was a particular humorous clip where a girl scored a goal against Marisa, but it was a blatant handball, but the ref didn't see it. And I brought this up to her, and first thing I think you should notice from that is that she actually laughs very spontaneously. That's an important skill, okay? So she's able to show that in the moment she's able to laugh, have a good time. Secondly, she then told the story about the clips. She didn't just say, oh yes, there's a YouTube channel. No, she told the story about why those clips were there. So she told the story about those were the clips that she used in order to get a scholarship into Stonehill, where she was, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she used it as a chance to tell the story. And then I mentioned the handball clip, and then she used that as a chance to tell the story as to the fact that her dad had taken those clips, why her dad had taken those clips was basically so he wouldn't be able to talk to the ref. And then she even told the story as to why that clip was there. And she didn't just say, oh yeah, that was upsetting, this girl did that and she shouldn't have done that and I was annoyed. No, she told the story as to why she was the goalie, in fact, was because her team was so bad that basically she got put into goalie. And she mentioned this fact that she had the most, I think statistics, most shots at goal against her in the state of Maine. And again, that was basically because her team was not very good. And then. So from one or two simple questions, not only, and again, she started by laughing, so she can show that she's spontaneous, she's not anxious, right? But then she took it as a chance to highlight something that you would remember even after the interview, which was, oh, Marisa used those clips to get scouted for college soccer, for a scholarship, and, her dad, etc., etc. Because humor is a really good way of being memorable, but the underlying skill set is being able to tell a story. Because this is why, for example, we'll sit down happily and watch a 3-hour, well, most of us will be happy to sit down and watch a 3.5-hour superhero movie, but we're bored within 3 minutes of sitting down at school. Because when you sit down at school, you're not told this wonderful story. You just start getting told all this stuff that you don't want to know, and you know that you're never going to need to know this stuff anyway, right? So she tells that story, but she uses it to highlight some of her qualities, for example, on that one. So the fact that she got a scholarship into college, the fact that she's an athlete, right? The subtle fact that she has this weird record in the state of Maine, and she's not bragging about it, but it's like, oh, it's kind of cool, right, to be a record holder. And, she tells a story, it's a funny story, and so she's able to engage the audience in this case, because it was a public interview, or if it had been in a pageant interview in a closed setting, it would have engaged the interviewer. They would have had a bit of a laugh, and now the interviewers engage with you. They're on your side because they find you interesting. They know you can have a bit of a laugh. It's a little bit of a quirky story. But also this girl, she's a college athlete and she got a scholarship for that. That's good. I don't know if it was a scholarship. I shouldn't. I sometimes get confused with all the stories that I've heard. But I know that she played sport in college for multiple sports. College, it was not college, soccer, cheerleading, and lacrosse as well. The sport that we don't have lacrosse here in Australia. But anyway. She's very successful. That's the moral of the story. And she used the question and controlled the interview by telling that story. And the final part to controlling the interview is, yes, you take the question, you use it as a chance to highlight some of the things that will show you in a good light. And that's not bragging. That's what you want to do. What are you going to do? Go into an interview and not talk about the stuff that makes you a great person? You're going to talk about all the stuff, all the reasons that put you in a bad light. You're not going to do that, right? And it wasn't done in a bragging way at all. But I'm just wary when I'm telling you this. Take your question and use it as a chance to shine the light on the best parts of you. You might go, oh, but that's bragging. No. No, this is what you're going to do, right? In a pageant interview, it's basically like a job interview. This is the right time to big yourself up. And you can still do it in a tactful way. But my point is, the other thing that's very noticeable, and again, watch interviews with Marisa, when she is done talking, silence, stops. So now the interviewer knows that she's finished, and the interviewer gets to ask the next question. And this is really important as well, because some of you will have a little syndrome when you go into interview, whether it's a public interview or a private one, and we like to call that syndrome verbal diarrhea, which is where you just never stop talking. And then you like to think that it's kind of charming and you laugh it off. And sometimes you actually think it's a good thing because you're very engaging and you think you're very funny. You might be very funny, right? The problem is, in a pageant interview, it's very, very time poor. I've heard of interviews where you only have 3 minutes to get through the whole thing. So learning to be succinct, learning how to wrap it up. So how to take control of the interview, use a question, whatever it is, to shine the light on a quality that you want to show or an aspect of what you achieved, and then be able to wrap it up succinctly so that the interviewer can ask you a next question is really, really important in a closed interview, in a pageant interview. And even, let's say, if you're having an interview on a YouTube platform or an Instagram with a pageant blogger, it's very important that you do know how to wind your question up. Because contrary to your belief as how entertaining you might be, and look, you might be, the fact is we're all very time poor, and our attention spans aren't very good these days. So you don't want to be the person that flogs a dead horse, keeps going on and on and on, and then you just watch the viewership numbers drop because you think you're funny, but the audience, even if they think you're funny, have just had enough, or they have to go to sleep, or they have to go to work. So I want you to watch Marisa's interview. You can watch Savannah's interview, and in terms, now that I'm thinking about it, they're quite similar in terms of how they front an interview. Now, Savannah is a deal younger, and she's maybe, let's say, not more, well, I would say maybe a bit more bubbly and a bit more vivacious. To be completely honest, the first time I interviewed Marisa, I was quite intimidated because I can tell anyway, because empathy is one of my big skills working as a coach. You develop a strong sense of empathy, or maybe more accurately, because I was born with a strong sense of empathy, I made a good coach. It's probably more that way around. But I could instantly tell when I saw Marisa pop on the webcam for the first time, like, oh, okay, this girl, you don't want to fool around with her. Like, she can see right through you, and that's why I found it slightly intimidating, which in a good way forces me to up my game. But if you watch the mechanics of controlling the interview, so first off, as I said, it still has to have that element of spontaneity. So interviews with Savannah, I've interviewed Savannah twice, I've interviewed Marisa twice, and in fact, I both had them on the podcast once. And, they are a joy to be around, right? Slightly different energies, but they fill a room. So you need to have that element of confidence and being at ease, which some of you already have, some of you will need to work on it, and I will say having more practice with it certainly goes a long way. Then secondly, you take whatever question you're given, and you don't just give a yes or no answer. But you also don't just start babbling. You control the interview. So you use that question as a chance to highlight a quality of yours, or highlight an aspect of yours, or an achievement of yours that you want to talk about, that paints you in a good light. And you do it by telling a story. Remember what I said, one of the biggest skills you can develop is that skill of storytelling. So again, that's one that will get a lot easier with practice. But you tell a story that's relevant and that shows you in a good light. And then that final aspect, that third aspect, is when you're done telling the story, stop. Stop. It might be a little bit uncomfortable for some of you. And I've noticed this in terms of having done 200 interviews, and a lot of them being American, and a lot of them being from the UK, a lot of them being from Australia. The Australians, us Aussies, and you Brits and the Irish tend to ramble a little bit more. And you say ums and ahs and likes a little bit too much. The Americans are much better at stopping when they're done. But also, if they're thinking about an answer to a question, they're much more likely to just pause for a second, think about the answer, and then start. It's almost like the Aussies and us Aussies and the Brits and some other countries as well. It's almost like the default is, oh, I need to start talking straight away because otherwise I look like I'm dumb or something. No. Because if you just start babbling straight away, and in the first 5 seconds all you're saying is or like, well, I mean, that's not an answer anyway, right? Much better, shows a lot more confidence for you to be comfortable with a bit of silence, give that thoughtful answer, take control of the interview, and then again show the confidence by stopping. And I'm not saying that you don't answer the question anymore. If they want more information about the topic that you were talking about, the interviewer can ask, the interviewer can follow up. So with Marisa, for example, I talked about the soccer clips that she had on her YouTube channel. Then she stopped, and then I asked about the handball clip, and then we talked more about that. So this is and this is sort of a 4-year journey it's been through, sort of trying to discover my own version, at least, maybe I should just ask Savannah exactly what she means, but it's not the easiest thing when someone's in America to just pick their brains, and she's a busy girl. I think she's actually in Paris now, or heading to Paris. But that 4-year journey of hearing this concept of controlling the interview to now having had, and she was one of my first interviews, Savannah, the first time. So that might have been interview 20 or 8, might have been teens or something like that. So, finally 200 interviews later going, okay, I think I know what she meant. But I really hope that gives you a framework for working on your interview. And I know I talk a lot about mindset, and this is not really a mindset thing. This is more the mechanics. This is more the strategy. But it's still a high-level strategy. It's not a tactic. Right? People will say, you should answer by talking about your platform. You should talk about this. You should talk about that. Well, those are all tactics. They're all well and good by their own. But what's that high-level strategy in terms of controlling the interview and making sure all the pieces are there? And I think this is a very important element of your interview strategy, is being able to control the interview. And this is something that, if you haven't done it before, so if what I'm saying to you, you go, that's a good idea, but I've not done this before, please don't think that you're going to be able to go into a pageant interview without having practiced this and be able to execute it. It is a higher level strategy. It's a higher skill strategy, particularly because it involves storytelling. And when the elements of a good story in terms of pageant interview yes, it needs to be entertaining, which isn't a skill in and of itself, but you need to know the various aspects of you that you want to highlight with the story. Remember, I said use a story as a chance to highlight the bit that you want to highlight. Well, again, you only get good at that by practice. And a lot of us are not very good or comfortable at telling stories. We'd rather give the yes or no answer and then sort of disappear back into our corner. But that's not going to hold you in good stead in an interview. So my wrap up to this is, please practice. And if you're going, Adrian, how do you practice? Well, if you can get on an interview show, that'll be a good chance to practice. In fact, that'll be a great chance to practice. Because, and I might get into trouble for saying this, a lot of interviewers in the pageant space aren't very good, right? I like to think I'm quite good, right? Maybe sometimes even very good on occasion. But a lot of pageant interviewers, they're not very good at asking questions in a sequence that sort of tells a story. So they sometimes go from asking a question about, what's your favorite joke to what's your stance on abortion. I'm like, what? And sometimes you can see the girl going, what on earth are you like? How did we go from there to there? And sometimes they tend to ramble a little bit and they cut you off, and then you might have technical issues and you got to deal with feedback, being cut off. So really the best way to do this is reach out to some pageant blogger, see if you can get an interview. If you can't do that, just get your friend to ask you some questions. Get a friend who's willing to do this and knows why it's important to you. Right? And just run through it with them. But I would suggest that I highly suggest that you record it so then you can watch it back and get feedback. The number of people who are unwilling to look at the feedback, look at the video, whether it's of their interview or their walk, it just it boggles my mind. Because yes, when you see the footage for the first time, you'll probably be shocked and not too happy, but that's a good thing. Because that means then you get to go and work on it. So confronting the truth is a good thing. Running away from it, not such a good thing. And don't just leave it to a coach either. A coach is another set of eyes, but you should know you better than the coach knows you. So that's it. Controlling the interview. If you have any questions about the skill, let me know. You can DM me, email me on info@thepageantproject.com, and get out there and watch some pageant interviews, not just to watch them, but to sort of analyze, okay, and if it's a good interview, analyze why do you think it's a good interview? What are some of the skills that the Queen has shown? And then if you happen to watch a bad interview, because there are a lot of those as well, have a look, analyze it a little bit and go, where do I think this interview went off the rails? right? What does this person tend to ramble too much? Does this person have a lot of what we call brain farts? There's ums, ahs, likes, you knows. And just start building your own little library of interview skills. Now, mindset always comes first. You can have the best skills. I've said this many times. I'm not going to flog a dead horse, but just a reminder, you can have the best skills in the world, but if your mindset, if in your mind you're anxious, you're nervous, you're tired, you're sick, those skills you're not going to be able to utilize to the best extent. So remember, 80% mindset, 20% mechanics. And this episode was more on the mechanics because, as I said, they are more important. The mechanics are important, but the mindset is by far the most important component. If you're super confident, feeling super good, even if you're not that good at interview, you can model your way through pretty well just based on your energy, right? Let me leave it there. I'll see you in tomorrow's episode.